Good Sunday morning, Northeast Ohio. Busy week in Washington as the Senate passed on Friday the $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill. It keeps the government running, but it does something else. It kept the $300 million of funding in place for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The administration had proposed last month a 90% cut to just $30 million. Ohio Senators Portman and Brown among those working to get it restored.
We know that Lake Erie is the shallowest of the Great Lakes by far. It's as shallow as 30 feet in the western basin, and we know it's the most vulnerable to pollution and runoff and all the things that made our Great Lake a little less great over the years. And we have done extraordinarily, I think, our state, our federal government, people locally, we've done a great job cleaning up this lake, and I don't want to backslide.
And Senators Brown and Portman working together on that as they work together this week as well on legislation related to opioid addiction and sex trafficking. So I asked Senator Portman, why more than a month after the Florida school shootings have we not seen the same bipartisan approach when it comes to areas of agreement on gun legislation? Post-Parkland, your name was in the press a lot with the level of contributions from the NRA. Is the impact of the NRA is having in Congress what's blocking this?
Well, I take issue with that, as you know. I mean, my contributions to my campaign from the NRA were relatively small, 0.02%, I think, of my contributions. And what they do is they come out with independent expenditures, and that's what they did in my case. So when people say it was for Portman, well, yes and no. I mean, they were ads run against my opponent. If I had intervened and said, don't do that, it would have been illegal because they're totally independent. You can't tell these independent, by the way, there are lots of independent groups now that come in and do these ads. In fact, it's most of the spending in campaigns these days. So, you know, just a clarification, but look, it's not about an organization, it's about people. There are a lot of people in Ohio who have very strong views on the Second Amendment. There are also very strong views that the Second Amendment should not keep us from, moving forward on more substantial gun control legislation. These are strongly held views, and I represent our entire state. So you try to represent those views. The state's very split and divided on this. What I'm suggesting is, I think there are ways to help close that divide by saying, let's focus on these issues where we can find common ground. Not everybody agrees with this, I get it, but on background checks, let's tighten up the background check system. And that would be significant because there are people falling between the cracks, and I think background checks are a good idea. I do. And I mentioned the pump stocks and some other issues on school safety. But those are ways to be able to, I think, bridge the gap to a certain extent. Again, there'll be people who will disagree. But no, you don't ever go to Washington making votes based on what contributions you get, period. But I also wanted to clarify that it's a little different than what's been reported.
Differing views as well when it comes to the long-term impact of the new steel and aluminum tariffs that went into effect this Friday. But the head of one of Cleveland's oldest companies told me this week, for him there is no gray area. This was needed. Cleveland-Cliffs is the largest and oldest independent iron ore mining company in the United States, supplying iron ore from their mines in Minnesota and Michigan to the nation's blast furnaces for 171 years. Consider this.
Every single ton of steel produced in the United States goes through Cleveland-Cliffs.
Lorenzo Gonzalez is the president and CEO of the Cleveland-based company that will be greatly impacted by the new tariffs on steel that he argues will level the playing field with China, the country he says that has most negatively impacted the American steel industry.
China is the enemy. You have to accept that. People must start accepting that. It's not a trade war. It's not just a intellectual property war. It's real war.
Gonzalez says the nation's ability to manufacture steel is about two things: jobs and national security.
We have to produce steel in order to be able to defend ourselves, because during the time that we were building the internet and building Facebook, China was building islands in the South China Sea.
Including other countries in the tariffs, even allies is needed, he says, to avoid Chinese steel still flowing into the U.S. through those other countries, what's called transshipping.
Otherwise, the whack-a-mole will continue. We hit China here, China showed up in Europe, showed up in South Korea, showed up in Japan. And now, these guys are sending their steel here. And to believe that South Korea or Japan or the UK or Germany will stand up against China, they will not. We are the only ones that can do that. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Very frank discussion. You can find the extended version on our News 5 app. With Democracy 2018, I'm John Kosich. Enjoy your Sunday.